Don't Restore Labour, on the Makerfield Mania, Part 2. Burnham's failure would provide much schadenfreude, but it's also crucial to stop him from winning. Let's go through the reasons. Firstly, he is in favour of rejoining the EU, and was pushing for a second referendum before we left. Only in September 2025 he said, "Long term, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to say it, I want to rejoin it. I hope in my lifetime I will see this country rejoin the European Union." When this quote came to light after Burnham announced he was standing, he backpedaled. He said we shouldn't rerun those arguments, and that the focus of this by-election should be on Makerfield and the North West. Ha ha. However, he still maintains Brexit has been damaging, and long-term there is a case for rejoining. He cannot be trusted on the issue. Burnham also made his famous remark, also in September 2025, about the bond markets. We've got to get beyond this thing of being in hock to the bond markets. At the time, he said he would nevertheless abide by Rachel Reeves' fiscal rules to limit public spending. Days before the local election, Burnham suggested to Bloomberg these rules could be deviated from in certain circumstances, citing German defence spending. Given the perception that Burnham was big on public spending, this set tongues wagging. Perhaps unfairly, his words were taken to suggest he would waive the fiscal rules in other areas than defence. The remarks, commentators believed, had a negative effect on the bond market the day after the by-election was triggered, and thus a Burnham premiership seemed likely. Burnham kept going, and on the 16th of May he implied to Channel 4 he would nationalise water and energy companies, which would of course incur much public spending. We need a different path completely, put more things back under stronger public control: energy, housing, water, transport. I've done that with buses in Greater Manchester. So you take that principle and apply it to energy and apply it to the water. That's what I think we need to do. By the 18th of May, however, our Andy decided he needed to walk back on the bond markets remark and his fiscal rules position. Talking to ITV, he said, "I have never said you can just ignore the bond markets. I said that politicians had placed Britain in hock because of the way in which we lost control of our finances and public spending when we handed away control of energy, water, housing. That has left Britain in a weak position when it comes to public spending. I'm quite clear, I support the fiscal rules. There needs to be a plan to get the debt down." This was something of a garbled answer. He specifically mentioned the bond markets before, but in this response he started deflecting with a broader issue. Yes, we put ourselves more in hock to financial markets with privatisation, but that has got nothing to do with the bond markets. Nonetheless, after this intervention, the bond markets were reassured somewhat, and they relaxed again. In a sense, Burnham is right that policy should not be overly determined by private investors. The bond markets are also too intertwined with pension funds, making them vulnerable. Liz Truss was ousted because of this, and thus her democratic mandate, from Tory members, to modestly cut taxes in search of growth, was ignored in favour of market stability. However, you cannot simply pretend that governments do not have to borrow from investors to fund their spending, or that this borrowing does not result in interest or gilt yields that have to be paid back, getting higher the more government spending and debt levels increase. You cannot rely on some notion of modern monetary theory, MMT, that the government can simply create and spend as much money as it likes, because the consequence would be a depreciation of the currency and hyperinflation of prices. If, like Burnham, you have a quasi-Corbynite program of mass public spending, you really must consider the bond market when making such decisions. Otherwise, you're no better than Zach Polanski. And even if Burnham has changed tack on the issue, can we really trust him to keep his word? For that matter, can the Labour left really trust him to do what they want? The country does not need any more economic chaos right now, and some tightening of spending needs to happen, especially in the welfare sector. Burnham is one of those who joyously supported lifting the two-child cap, basically an invitation for welfare dependents to have more children. The welfare question is of course tied to immigration, as the ballooning numbers of incomers are a clear drag on benefits. There were also concerns that Burnham would ditch Shabana Mahmood's planned reforms, as it were, to the immigration system. Mahmood is set to double the time period needed to make migrants eligible for indefinite leave to remain, from 5 years to 10. In November 2025, concerning these measures in general, Burnham said, "I do have a concern about leaving people without the ability to settle. That might limit the Home Office's ability to deal with the backlog, and it may leave people in a sense of limbo and unable to integrate." He also opposed a 1999 Labour-written law which forbids migrants to receive state benefits until they are granted residency. Yet another set of Burnham flip-flops were to come. Realising how big the issue was, especially in Makerfield, on 20th of May he had allies suggest he would back Mahmood's plans. Burnham confirmed this was the case 2 days later. "We'll have to work hard to get the balance right, but the broad thrust of what she's doing is right." He also said that immigration numbers needed to come down. On the 29th of May, he announced he was no longer opposed to the 1999 law. Will the real Andy Burnham please stand up? Another volte-face was made on the trans issue. In 2019, he wrote a joint letter with 4 other Labour mayors, Sadiq Khan, Dan Jarvis and Steve Rotherham. It called on the then government to bring in self-ID, meaning a person could declare themselves another sex without a doctor signing off on it. Gender Recognition Act reform is a key step in addressing the marginalisation of trans and non-binary communities by allowing them to more easily gain legal recognition of their gender identity. The government has made commitments to streamline and demedicalise the gender recognition process. It is time to listen to the voices of our trans and non-binary communities and proceed with reforming this legislation. In a speech in 2022 to Manchester's Youth Combined Authority, Burnham said, "Clearly there is a group of people who do feel that toilets should be a safe space only for women, and there should not be anyone biologically a male allowed in that space. I don't think that's a majority view. In fact, I think it's a minority view, and quite a small minority view, actually. The idea that people are falsely portraying their gender in a different way just because they want to abuse a woman's space or encroach on women's safety, maybe it happens, but you are talking a tiny, tiny, tiny number of people. I am going to make it really plain. I support trans rights, and I want that to be known." He followed this up in 2025 by questioning the Supreme Court ruling on the issue. The ruling was that single-sex spaces were protected by equality legislation, and that biological sex was the basis for determining access to these spaces. Consequently, trans people of the opposite sex could not use them. Burnham observed, "I think it has become more confusing in the real world as a result. The interim guidance that was issued, I don't think that has taken us forward at all." Spool onto the campaign trail in 2026, and Burnham saw the light. "I think the time has come to take the Supreme Court ruling and the guidance and implement it, but do it in a way that protects those spaces but does not marginalise already marginalised communities." Under Our Andy, the Greater Manchester Combined Authority gave £112,000 to a charity which provided trans inclusion training and supported the use of puberty blockers. The biggest danger presented by Burnham, though, is his policy of proportional representation, PR. Some on the right might approve of this. I used to think it was the way ahead, but have since changed my mind. However, here's the sting in the tail. It is thought he also wants to establish a progressive coalition with other liberal left parties. If so, using PR this would coordinate to keep the right out of politics for generations. Working together, Rupert? Maybe you should take notes. Indeed, the Greens are clearly running a paper candidate in Makerfield. She is on maternity leave, having stepped in to replace the original candidate, a male nurse who shared dubious social media posts. These posts claimed the attack on Jewish community ambulances in Golders Green was a false flag operation. Heritage figures such as Caroline Lucas and Jonathan Bartley were against their party running. Perhaps using the damaging exit of the male nurse as a pretext, the Greens are reportedly not committing significant resources to the campaign. And why would they? The Greens know tactically it makes no sense to spend time, money and energy opposing someone who agrees with 70% of their worldview and will give them something they want. PR and a route towards power, shared or otherwise. Indeed, this is supported by an open letter organised by the think tank Compass and aimed at the Greens. It is signed by 11 prominent Green supporters, including Bartley. In all reality, this is not a seat Greens can win. It will be a straight fight between Labour and Reform, but it's no ordinary by-election. Labour's candidate, Andy Burnham, is looking to return to Westminster to lead in Parliament. Crucially for Greens and all progressives, Burnham is a strong supporter of proportional representation and has governed Manchester in a plural cross-party way, putting place before party. If Burnham will commit to backing PR for the next general Labour election manifesto so that it is in place by the election after next, then on this unique occasion we don't think Greens should run a full campaign against him. That is beautifully phrased, and the very same logic could apply to Restore, that they share political common ground and shared goals with Reform, and it makes sense to let Reform take the seat. Burnham and Compass are connected, because the founder, Neil Lawson, is a known supporter of Burnham's. Before the Simons resignation, Burnham was due to speak at one of their events, held on 30th of May, but he pulled out when he knew he'd be running in Makerfield. Also appearing would be Green and Lib Dem figures. This was publicised in early May, and Burnham's decision was met with criticism from other Labour figures. Compass is proposing to create a so-called Council for the Progressive Majority, which will push to promote PR. It will consist of 2 prominent figures each from Labour, the Greens, Lib Dems, Plaid Cymru and the SNP. Indeed, Burnham has long supported electoral reform. Partly, he claims, this is because until 2024, the Manchester mayoral elections were decided by a supplementary vote system, meaning second preferences can come into play if an outright majority is not won. He seems to like this idea, even though he's never needed it. He came away with a first-round majority in 2017 and 2021, and in the first-past-the-post system of 2024, he got 63% of the vote. I don't think this keenness is born out of democratic principle, but out of perceived necessity, nationally speaking. Some within Labour, not all, see their dwindling vote share, even in Starmer's landslide, and feel their only chance of keeping power is through a system that does not require an outright majority. In the days before the Compass letter, written on May 24th, Burnham told BBC Radio, "I do think there needs to be reform to the electoral system to enable less point scoring, more problem solving. That's what I think we need." Here there was no explicit promotion of PR, but following the Compass letter, Burnham was sure to get specific. He did this a week later on May the 31st, telling the Observer, "I am committed to proportional representation. I think it would change the political culture. I don't see how first past the post and the point scoring inherent within it lifts Britain out of the doom loop it is in." He said he will make this a manifesto pledge and will not hold a referendum on the matter. I would prefer a manifesto commitment. When I came into politics, my dad said, "Never commit to a referendum on anything." I look back and think how wise he was. It will follow an official consultation into exactly how the electoral system can be reformed, but one gets the impression PR is preordained in his mind. This gives credence to the idea Burnham might call an early general election. He may be in a hurry to fast-track this constitutional vandalism. In return, the Greens seem to have said, "Thanks very much, fill your boots, Andy." and thus Burnham is much more likely to win. Now the Greens aren't dragging on him, but Restore are bleeding votes from his main opponents. The Lib Dems likely feel the same, and won't be committing many resources either. The old Corbyn vehicle, Momentum, are also endorsing Burnham, despite them labelling him a Tory austerity enabler, and worse, when he stood in the way of Corbyn 11 years ago. This is the difference between the liberal left and the populist right. Although there are purity splits among the left, they generally vote together and for the strongest candidate when it counts. Zara Sultana and Corbyn are nowhere near Makerfield, for instance, despite them being egotists on the same level as Lowe. They are to the Greens what Restore are to Reform. I suppose the right is fortunate that Ben Habib hasn't stood an advance candidate as well, but the humiliating experience in Gorton and Denton has chastened him, and now he is folding the party, probably with a view to getting a position in Restore. Heritage and UKIP have also stayed away, and the UKIP leader, Nick Tanconi, has broken the mould by suggesting Restore should stand down for reform. So these are the reasons Burnham must not be allowed to win. The concluding part of this video series will be released shortly.